Hi guys. So we are going to talk about the anatomical character dissection project today. I've been sitting here arguing with my mouse. Yesterday was April Fool's and my son taped one of those little poppets, those little snappers that you throw at the ground to the bottom of my mouse. He was hoping that when I often bang it on my desk like that, he was hoping that I would do that and it would snap, and it didn't, but it did leave little sandy bits all over my desk. Kind of all over the mouse pad and stuff. So I've been trying to grind it away, which doesn't really matter to anyone here except me, I guess. It was kind of funny though. He's a little bored. Anyhow, so the anatomical character dissection. This is one of my favorite projects. Probably this and the entomology, I think, are maybe my two favorite projects in the class. The anatomical character dissection is, it's based on two things. It's based on the work of Jason Freeney, who's an artist. This is his Hello Kitty piece right here. Pardon me. And he had started this thing in the probably 1990s, where he took these cartoon characters and he did their anatomy. He did them like anatomy posters that you'd find in a classroom or in a doctor's office, and they were real popular at the time. People really got into them. I think it's really funny. And then there's also another project I'll show you that I did in grad school called Anatomy Man. He was part of a project I did for this group called Cradle to Grave that worked with teens in South Philly or North Philadelphia, they had a lot of big gang problem with lots of kids getting shot, and we were trying to do this educational thing to talk about gunshots. I'll show it to you. But anyhow, just of showing the anatomy, I thought it was a great way for you to kind of compile all of the anatomy study you've been doing this semester into a fun illustration. So this is an example. I'll show you some examples first, and then I'll go over the project. I'll show you my Anatomy Man piece. This is one of Jason Freeney's pieces, and Hello Kitty is pretty fun. And there, I'll show you links to a bunch of others. Oh, there's our project. We'll get back to that. Here's another one he did. This is Popeye, obviously. The reason I showed this piece is because if you look at this Popeye, this is obviously a 3D sculpture, a 3D model that he did. But if you look at it, the chin, so the skeleton explains the external anatomy of this character. The bones in the hand are humongous. The abdomen area and the intestines are really long. The legs are really short and the feet are huge. But what he did is he modifies the internal structure to meet the external structure of the cartoon. It's kind of tricky. Here's a few samples from class, and I cannot always remember the student's name that did these. They kind of pile up. But here's the finished piece, and I'm going to show you the different steps because this takes quite a bit of work to get to. This student chose to do this traditionally in pencil on marker paper, tissue paper, and do the overlays, which is how I recommend doing it, but you could also do this exact same procedure digitally if you were working on a Cintiq or something like that. I've had several students do it digitally and be very successful at it. So, but here you can see the overlay. Let me go down and show you some different parts. So I'm going to find the skeleton first. Here's the skeleton. I would start with the skeleton. So she did this skeleton to try to describe the body. And this person has a very long abdomen and the short, squatty, square head. So you can see the outline of the body underneath. Draw your character and then add the skeleton in. And again, it's kind of a tricky part. And then do overlays with the various layers. I think we're doing respiratory, digestive, circulatory, and skeletal systems. You can add more if you want, but those are the only ones that are required. So here's the first sketch of the circulatory system, and we went back and worked out some problems that had. Respiratory system, skeletal. This is kind of a first run through in Adobe Illustrator, it looks like, of trying to get those layers turned into an illustration. Have the tongue sticking out. The respiratory system. There's just the outside of the character. Digestive system. The stomach was going to have a close-up with this half-eaten sandwich and these bugs. We'll have to look at the final. I don't remember if she put that in or not, but clever. Circulatory system. There's some roughed in with color. There's the outside of the character, obviously. And here's a compilation of the final. No, she did not do the cutaway with the stomach, though it would have been really, really funny. And here's each system: digestive system, circulatory system, respiratory system, skeletal system. And then if we go all the way back to the beginning, the idea is to show the half of the external and half of the internal. And if you look at the Hello Kitty, it's kind of the same way. You see the outside of the character and the inside of the character. And then there's these little cutaways that show what the finished piece looks like. They show each system and everything is labeled. I showed you some examples. I'll show you some more. Sample 1, sample 2. These are just the working process. These are not the finals that I'm showing you right now. This was for Elmo. This was Sam. I can't remember her last name. Anyhow, Elmo. I thought it was a cute character to choose. So here's Elmo. Here's the planning sketches for Elmo. So his body, his skeletal system, explaining his rather large head and long fingers, digestive, circulatory and respiratory together, and circulatory system. Here's the skeleton. And here's the final, with half inside of Elmo and half outside of Elmo. And there's the insides overlaid on top of Elmo. This is the final art that was, I think this was photoshopped, I'm not sure. And another sample. We looked at this one last week. This one, we don't have very many of the planning sketches. Here's what the final looked like. Again, I thought that this, here's one planning sketch. And so she had the artwork back here, and then this is the skeleton laid in real loose. This is a very preliminary sketch. You're just trying to make things fit. So you see how the artists kind of, they built up their characters. There's a rough sketch of the digestive system. There's the final line pieces. And she did the front and the back of the skeleton, which I thought was a great idea. Digestive, circulatory, and this heart, it looks like a little face, like there's an eye and a nose and some ears. Anyhow, it's kind of weird. Nervous system, that was a big leap. One of the few people that's ever done the nervous system. Nervous system's tricky. It takes a little bit of extra studying, but came out really well. Circulatory, also tricky, but final, and you saw all the way at the top, we saw the final piece. Let's see, let me find my sample folder. I had shown you some finals last week of how that ended up being laid out in the end. Here you go. Nigel Thornberry. Same exact way this was developed. Laid the character down, made the skeleton fit, showed each view separate, showed half the exterior view, half the interior view, and then all the labeling. And the labeling, it can be exact or it can be kind of comical, like the guy with the peg leg. Let me find him. Captain Knuckles. And she accounted for, he's got a wooden hip and a wooden leg, and his sitting muscle and his candy holders for his hands. But again, each system is drawn out separately in a smaller, and then you see the external and the internal. So it's just, think about this like if this were a real character, a real person, that and Nigel Thornberry went into his doctor's office and he could see what his anatomy looked like. If I have any other samples I want to show you again. Oh, I've shown you Ambria Scott's piece a couple times, I think. Again, just one of my favorite pieces, especially the skeleton for Johnny Bravo. Just done, just fabulous. And again, she didn't lose her style in this. She kind of kept how she likes to draw, but she really respected the anatomy and really manipulated it very, very well. Like the lungs, the various, like this lung has 2 lobes, and I cut out where the heart it sits in there. This lung has 3 lobes, the diaphragm. She just did a really good job with this piece, and then that's the whole character together. Just a super, super lot of fun on that one. I think, let me pull this up and show you. This is a piece that I did in grad school. So I was working with this group called, you had to do a big, it's called a research project, but really it's a project that takes a lot of research. But so I was working with this group called the Cradle to Grave program in North Philadelphia. And they have a whole lot of gang violence there, a lot of shootings. And this Cradle to Grave program was in one of the hospitals in Philadelphia where they dealt with a lot of these gunshot wounds. And they had a lot of teenagers coming in that had been shot. So they started this program where they brought kids into the ER and they showed them, X-rays. They showed them the whole case of like what really happened to somebody. A lot of these kids, they have very little training in anatomy, and from movies they often see the idea that, like the hero gets shot in the shoulder and he just keeps on going, or he gets shot in the leg and he just keeps on going, or even worse, he gets shot in the gut and he just keeps on going, and they kind of get this impression that there's lots of extra room in your body. There's areas where you can get shot and you don't get hurt. It's kind of the gang culture. The people that have been hurt, have a colostomy bag because their intestines got destroyed with a bullet. They don't talk about it and they don't come out. They kind of just disappear. And so the younger generation doesn't really know this happens. So the idea behind this was to teach them anatomy. So this was an interactive game where they had to move all the anatomy to where it belonged, and they learned about the anatomy. And so here's the skeleton. So all these pieces were floating out here, and they had to put stuff where it belonged. Nervous system, circulatory system, urinary system, digestive, let's see, respiratory. You can see that on top of the circulatory system, where you can kind of see through the lungs. Skeleton top, so there's the front of the skeleton with the ribs, so we added that on. And the muscular system, and I've never really liked this muscular system piece, and it may just be the color. The red is just too, I don't like the red. It's not poorly drawn. I don't think it's correct. It's anatomically correct. It's drawn pretty well, but I don't know if the color bothers me or something. I've never liked this. I've never liked the muscular system on that one. And small boxes. Oh, okay. The small boxes go to these other illustrations showing a gunshot in these various spots. So within the game, you see that your character gets shot in the shoulder, and now that you've learned the anatomy, you look at the various things that can get destroyed within the shoulder: the blood vessels, the nerves, the bone, how close it is to a lung. So they get to see what really happens when somebody gets shot in the shoulder. And we were trying not to make it too bloody and gross. So here's the thigh. So if you get shot kind of in the groin area, the big femoral arteries and veins, all the nerves down here, people can bleed out real easily from that gunshot right there. And the gut. That people are always getting shot in the gut, and we talk within the game about getting shot in the intestines, and the intestines spilling fecal matter into your gut, and septic shock and things that can happen with having a section of your intestines removed. So it was really just trying to be really straightforward with the students I'm sorry, with the teenagers, and just teach them about anatomy and teach them what really happens when they get shot or they shoot somebody. So that was my Anatomy Man project. That was one thing that kind of set this whole project for you guys off, is this one that I did, but I wanted to make it a little more fun than this for you. So we went to a cartoon, your favorite cartoon, and we called it the anatomical character dissection. This is the lesson overview. We'll go over that in a second. If you go in here, there's a couple papers for pre-class reading. They're kind of dry. They're let me open them. 50 Years of Anatomy in 50 Minutes and Misrepresentation of the Human Pelvis. It's dry reading, but this one is very interesting because it talks about how Vesalius back in the 1500s misdrew the hips, the pelvis, and how anatomists for years, like hundreds of years after that, just took his reference and went with it. And it wasn't until, much later that people were like, it's not really how the pelvis sits on the body. So that's why I say, when you look up online reference, make sure you're getting good sources, because there's a lot of bad anatomy drawings out there. Let's see, go back here. Oh, there's two videos on Jason Freeney, who's the sculptor that we were talking about, and the artist that makes the anatomical figures. Fun stuff. Here's another video talking about the surface anatomy of the skeleton, the example art, and anatomical landmarks. Do I have that open already? Let me see if I got that open yet. This is going to be really... I do. This is going to be really important to this piece, is anatomical landmarks. Anatomy, it sits in specific places in your body, obviously. Like the bottom edge of the heart is called the apex, and the apex of the heart is always right around the fifth rib. So if you're really compressing your if you're really compressing or enlarging your rib cage to fit your character, you have to also think how that anatomy is going to be affected. The arch of the aorta sits right behind the sternum. So if your rib cage were way wide all the way out here, the heart is probably also going to be a wider kind of heart. So the arch can sit behind the sternum and the apex can get out to the fifth rib. So you have to think about those kind of landmarks. There is... Do I have it up here or not? Let me see if I can find it. There is another paper I'm going to show you. And it may not be up on Go Studio, and I just realized that. Anatomical landmarks. Oh, yeah, there it is. I think that's it. Let's find out. Oh, anatomical landmarks. This paper just talks about all the different landmarks. So the heart, where do you find the heart? The lungs, where do you find the lungs? The liver, stomach, pancreas. A friend of mine who's a medical illustrator and a anatomy instructor at UIC put this together when she was teaching anatomy. This tells you where everything is in the body in simple terms. So you can go through here, use this paper to make sure that you get your anatomy in the right spots. It's going to be really, really helpful to you. Okay, enough of that. Let's look at the actual project sheet, the project sheet. Alright, here's the project sheet, updated for 2020. Everything in this class is now due by April 23rd. So we've got about 4 weeks to work on this. We've maybe got 3 weeks to work on this, which means you're going to really need to get going on it. Come up with your character idea and do your anatomical rough-ins. And I think we should probably look at the rough anatomy systems next week at the latest. if we look at them a week from now. So you've got your character laid out and you've got your anatomy systems tucked in there. I have another appointment on Tuesday of next week and Thursday, so I'm going to have to change my office hours. We'll have to find a time that we can meet or meet one-on-one to look at your anatomical systems. We'll figure something out. From there, you're going to go to the detailed line work of the skeletal and respiratory systems, detailed line work of the digestive and circulatory systems. We'll look at those again, make any system revisions, and then do your final finished layers in Photoshop or Illustrator. You don't have this. This says to find a cartoon. You don't have to. This was our last project of the year. This is usually our last project of the year. And our final critique, we put a cartoon, comic reel together to show little 5-minute clips of every character that we critique, and it's really a lot of fun. We bring popcorn and stuff, but we're not going to get to do that. Maybe we could have a virtual screening and do it all together, and everybody can bring their own popcorn. We'll figure something out. Pre-class readings. Here's the videos again. This is Jason Freeney's website, and again, this is just an overview of how to do the project, and we've talked about it. Oh, I wanted to show you one other thing too. As soon as I'm done with this, I'll show you. I'll show you right now, actually, so I don't forget. These are the sketches for the Anatomy Man, and you saw some of the other. These are not the sketches. Those are the first. These are the. Here's my scan. Here's my first sketches. They're quite a bit rougher than those. These are my final scans, so my final drawings. These were done on 11 by 17 paper and scanned in 2 pieces, and I had to put them back together. This was done a long time ago before I had a Cintiq, but this is definitely how I would do it. And then these X's, what the X's are for, so when I lay the drawings over each other, if I go down here and I line these X's up, and the skeleton had X's, so I laid the skeleton down and I did each drawing over top of the skeleton, and those X's correspond with the X's on the skeleton, so when you lay the layers together, everything lines back up. So those are just reference marks. There's some muscular. So these are my line drawings that I worked with. And then I took these into Adobe Illustrator and worked from there, which, trust me, drawing the circulatory system in Adobe Illustrator was a complete pain in the rear. I mean, the nervous system in Illustrator was a giant pain. Took a long time. If I did it now, I'd probably do it in Photoshop. Anyhow, live and learn. Let's see. On the objectives for the assignment, you must have at least 4 systems. You need at least the skeletal, the respiratory, the circulatory, and the digestive systems. You can use additional systems if you would like. Depends on what you're doing. If you want to show the urinary system, if you want to show the reproductive system, if it's pertinent to your character. Somebody did, was it Bojack? Is that what it was called? And it was a horse. And she either was going to put the reproductive system in, and it was very, very hilarious, and then I think maybe at the last minute she didn't. But it was kind of pertinent to the character because he was a very sex-crazed kind of character. So it was really important that his reproductive system was in there. I think at the last minute she didn't put it in, but it was funny. So whatever systems are actually, needed for your character, go there. Photoshop or Illustrator, again, I recommend Photoshop. Illustrators, I've only had one person do it in Illustrator, and that was the little dragon, which I showed you. I'll pull him up here real quick. There he is. This is the only one I've ever had done in Adobe Illustrator, and this artist worked almost entirely in Adobe Illustrator, so was very quick with the program. So it's up to you. Let's see, where'd we go? Project sheet. And the final is to produce an 18 by 24 full color poster. So again, something that Nigel Thornberry would find in his doctor's office, or something that you might study in your anatomy class. Digital artwork submitted as a flattened JPEG. I want you to, all the planning sketches, I want to see all your preliminary sketches. I want all that stuff submitted. and then I want individual layers submitted, and I want the final artwork submitted. So I want to see your whole working process. Your working process is super important in this piece. It's kind of a cool project. It's kind of a big project. If you get hung up on anything, don't hesitate to email me or send me a message on Slack. If you need to do a one-on-one critique or just to go look at your stuff or talk it through, I'm always happy to do that. And I think that's all we need to know about this assignment. So good luck with it, and let me know if you get stuck. Take care.